To talk to us today is Mike Unwalla. So, Mike, thank you very much for coming along and talking to us about Simplified Technical English.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to listen to me. Why do we need Simplified Technical English? The UK Health and Safety Executive writes that typical examples of immediate causes and contributing factors for human failures are missing or unclear instructions. In the most recent issue of Communicator, Tom Wardak writes, "Complex concepts don't mandate complex explanations. Tangled prose reflects a tangled writer with a loose grip on their subject matter." In this presentation, I'll show you how STE helps to make text as clear as possible. I love STE, other people disagree and they don't like it. And for an excellent counter argument, I recommend that you read The Great STE Myth, which Mike Bergstrom wrote, and it's in winter 2018 of Communicator. The term STE, the abbreviation STE, stands for Simplified Technical English. And the specification for Simplified Technical English is ASD STE 100. Usually I will say STE, except if I really want to emphasize the specification itself. I'd like you to think about some text that I'm going to give you. It's quite a simple text. It's one sentence, uses simple grammar and simple words. Here it is. Find the person on the hill with the telescope. Make a picture in your mind. Think of the colours. Who can you see? What can you see? Find a person on the hill with a telescope. Do you see this? A person has a telescope. The person's on the hill. Find the person. Or do you see this? There are two hills. On one hill, there's a person and a telescope. Find a person. Or do you see this one? A person's on a hill. Use a telescope to find a person. So we have one simple sentence, simple grammar structure, simple words, and yet three interpretations are possible. In a project for software documentation, I found these technical terms: base deck, base model deck, base simulation deck, base simulator deck, deck file, main body of the deck, main simulation deck, model deck, original deck, simulation base deck, and simulator deck. And those 13 terms all mean the same thing, base simulator deck. Well, how are the readers expected to know this? It's not only technical terminology that can cause confusion and problems. Think about the adverb usually. In standard English, we have synonyms and near synonyms, such as by and large, chiefly, generally, habitually, most of the time, in general, mostly, predominantly, and so on. Think about the verb change, and we have synonyms or near synonyms, such as adapt, adjust, alter, amend, modify, revise, and rework. Now, it's possible that there are technical differences between those verbs, and if so, our readers need to know what the differences are. But if we're just using these words as synonyms to make the text interesting, I suggest that that's not necessary. I'll talk a little more later about that. Some of the readers of our documents don't read English as a first language, and multi-word verbs are a special problem for these readers. In an article from 2001, Emily Thrush wrote in the article Plain English, a study of plain English vocabulary and international audiences. And she spoke about the problems of phrasal verbs, and she gave the very sad story of a China Airlines flight from 1989. And the last words on the voice recorder were, what does pull up mean? And then the aircraft crashed and many people died. Now the problem was not that the pilots didn't know English. The problem was that the correct technical term is climb, not pull up. A large problem with phrasal verbs such as pull up is that they're idiomatic, and the meaning is not the sum of the parts. Think about the verb carry out to mean do. Well, we don't carry anything, neither in nor out. Or put up with to mean tolerate. Well, we don't put anything anywhere, neither up nor down, with nor without. And the verb work out to mean calculate. Well, possibly I can think of work in a sort of mental sense, but in and out, not really. Phrasal verbs are a particular type of multi-word verb where we can split the two parts of the word with a noun phrase. So in standard English, I can write carry the project out, and I can write carry out the project. So we've got two problems. We've got the idiomatic nature of the verb, and we've got one part of the verb is at the start of the sentence, and the other part of the verb is at the end of the sentence, split with possibly a very long noun phrase. So those are just some very basic examples of how simple and how easy it is to make text that is confusing. And now I'm going to talk about how STE helps to make texts easy to read. STE is a controlled language, a controlled natural language. Well, what's one of those, you ask? ISO tells me that controlled natural languages are a subset of natural languages whose grammars and dictionaries have been restricted in order to reduce or eliminate both ambiguity and complexity. An important principle of controlled languages is one term, one meaning. And ASD is a very controlled language. I forgot to mention, actually, if you're in an uncontrolled situation, I gave the example of change as another one with fulfill. If you're talking about, say, an order processing system in an uncontrolled environment, you might talk about fulfilling an order and dealing with an order and executing an order. In a controlled environment, you use just one verb consistently. So STE is a controlled language. It's got rules for the approved words that you can use. It's got rules for the unapproved equivalents that you mustn't use. There are rules about the lengths, sentence lengths, the permitted tenses that you can use. There's a rule to say don't use phrasal verbs, so that gets rid of the problem that we saw earlier on. There are rules about the parts of speech that you can use permitted terms for. The STE dictionary has approximately 850 basic words. These are the building blocks of our technical documentation. And so they are obviously the articles. We need the articles A and the nouns such as person, colour, connection and maintenance. Verbs such as put, stop, tell, find. Prepositions in, at, on, under. Adjectives large and small and perpendicular, and adverbs such as usually and fully and not. Okay, so in standard English, a word can have more than one part of speech. And by part of speech, I mean the grammatical category that a word can have. So table, chair, book, and content management system are all nouns. They're all things. But some of those can also be verbs. So, for example, book, as in I booked a table at the restaurant in years gone by, where we could do that sort of thing. Using a word with only one meaning and with only one part of speech can help people who don't know English very well. So many years ago, I taught English as a foreign language, and I remember one student who was very confused by the word mine. And he knew the word mine as a possessive pronoun, as in the pen is mine, the pen belongs to me. And the course book introduced the word mine as a noun to mean a hole in the ground. And he was really confused, and he really struggled to understand that this one word mine, it can have two different meanings. And of course, we've got mine, the verb. To prevent this type of problem, STE permits usually a word to have only one part of speech. And I'm going to now share part of my screen with you. So, for example, the word oil is approved in STE as a noun, but not as an adjective. Sorry, not as a verb. So in STE, I mustn't write oil a valve, but I can write put oil on the valve, and I can write, if I want to use a verb, I can say something like lubricate the valve or lubricate the valve with oil. The word level is approved both as a noun and as an adjective, but not as a verb. So I can write, I must not write level the aircraft, but I can write make the aircraft level, and I can write if the level of the fuel is whatever. Another rule from STE is that you mustn't use helping verbs to make complex verb structures. Helping verbs are also known as auxiliary verbs or modal verbs. So, for example, don't write this type of device has been being used at Boeing since 2005. Change the structure, write something like Boeing started to use this type of device in 2005. The grammar, the tenses that STE has are sufficient for technical documentation, instructions, descriptions, and explanations. You can't do everything that you can with all the English tenses, with the tenses that you have in STE. Another rule is that we must use the active voice in instructions. So the active voice, X does Y, and the passive voice, Y is done by X. So in an instruction, I think we'll all agree that the test is continued by the operator is not good at all. You know, STE says it, and many other style guides and plain English and so on say it. So we write continue the test. STE does not say do not use the active, do not use the passive voice. The passive voice is very, very good. It's just not good in an instruction when you're trying to tell somebody to do something. Words with two meanings. In English, a word can have one word with one particular part of speech, can have many, many, many meanings. One of the rules in STE is that we use a word with its approved meaning. So, for example, the word about is approved as an adjective with the meaning of pertaining to, relating to. It's not approved with a sense of approximately. So I mustn't write use about 3 litres of water, but I can write use approximately 3 litres of water. And I can write tell personnel about these new regulations. The noun regulation is not approved if it's used in the context of control or restriction. So I mustn't write the regulation of the temperature is automatic. I must write the adjustment of the temperature is automatic. And then the sentence, this regulation is necessarily, well, I don't know whether that conforms to STE or does not, because I don't have sufficient context. If regulation refers to control, then it's not correct. But if it refers to a type of document, then it is correct. And now I'm going to ask James to take back control, please. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and one more. Do not, I can write, do not break the glass, but I must not write, do not break the rules, because in this context, breaking the rules is idiomatic. But not always. Do not break the rules. And now I'm going to change topic and talk about a common misconception that people have about simplified technical English. I'm just going to have a look at my notes again. Okay, so to start with, I want to talk about technical words, technical terms. The specification has got approximately 850 basic words that you can use. And then people say, well, 850 words is not sufficient. We have hundreds of thousands of terms. How can we write about our product with only 850 words? And of course, they're correct. There are two rules. Rule 112, which is about technical verbs, and Rule 1.5, which is about technical names. So technical names are nouns such as manufacturing processes, names of parts, names of equipment, tools, mathematic terms, scientific terms, part names. And technical verbs are the verbs that you need to describe and discuss your product, such as to drill or to upload or to disambiguate. And within these rules, there are various categories. And if you put a word into a category, then you can use that word as a technical term. Also, you can use words that are not approved in the dictionary. So, for example, the word gear as a noun is not approved in the dictionary, and the ASD/STE 100 tells you to use the word equipment. But what happens if you have this circular thing with pointy bits that meshes with another circular thing with pointy bits? It's called a gear. And of course you can use the word gear. And what ASD/STE 100 does not do very well is to discuss the concepts of word sense disambiguation. It's not that you cannot use this word. What they really mean is you cannot use this lemma, this particular set of alphanumeric characters with this part of speech with this meaning. So the word gear to mean equipment is not correct, but the word gear to mean the circular thing with pointy bits is correct. And a lot of the confusion that people have with STE is that they don't grasp the concept that it's not that a word's not approved, but it's that a lemma is not approved. And that goes back to one word, one meaning. What are you using your words for? And if you mean gear to mean a circular thing with pointy bits, don't use it also to mean equipment. So now, enough of the specification itself. Let's talk about STE in your organization. So if you decide that STE is a good thing and you think you want to use it, the first thing to do is to get a copy of the specification. It's free on request. And by the way, I will supply all these references to the references at the end in the chat box. So you get your specification, and then you train your technical writers to use STE. So when you search for a training provider, and when you read things on the internet, such as approved training and authorized, you always ask by whom. The STE, the Simplified Technical English Maintenance Group, the STEMG, these are the people who update the specification. They recommend their training provider, the Union Nettuno University. Union Nettuno supplies a distance learning course. I know also that all the members of the STEMG are approved to give training, and that's it. No, ASD does not endorse any other trainer. You will get resistance from some writers. So at the 2010 TCUK conference, I asked 31 technical writers whether they use controlled language, and one guy raised his hand. And I asked who wanted to use a controlled language, and nobody raised their hand, and he put his hand out. Not one person wanted to use a controlled language. Well, I find that very strange. I really just do not understand it. I know that some writers want creativity. In his book, Spring into Technical Writing for Engineers and Scientists, Barry Rosenberg suggests that for non-technical verbs, we can use synonyms to make the text more interesting. Think back to the example with change. Is the verb change a technical term? If no, why not? What makes it not a technical term? And if it is a technical term, then we don't want to use synonyms. And my belief is that, look, if we accept the principle of one term, one meaning for our technical terminology, what's the reason not to accept that principle for non-technical terminology, however we wish to define non-technical? Some writers don't like STE because it's not familiar, they don't know it, they learned a literary style. Think back to when you're 7 and you go to school on a Monday morning and it was a beautiful weekend and teacher says, write me a story about what you did at the weekend. And so you start your story, and it was a nice day, so we went to the zoo and I saw lots of nice animals, and then I had a nice ice cream, and then Mummy and Daddy took me home and Mummy cooked me a nice tea, and I like Mummy and Daddy because they're nice. And teacher says, well, you know, maybe you want to start thinking of alternatives for the word nice. But we're not 7 and we don't need to expand our vocabulary. We need to make sure that our technical documentation is as clear and as succinct as possible. STE is blunt. So the word obey is the approved verb that you use when you want somebody to do something. You obey the instructions. You don't ask people to follow instructions or adhere to instructions or stick to instructions. You obey instructions. And some people don't like that bluntness. Terminology management is an important part of the overall implementation of STE. Now, the specification does not discuss terminology management at all. It tells you can use your technical terms, but it doesn't tell you how to get them. The first part of terminology management is the data mining, the data analysis, the term extraction, call it what you will. So software's out there to help you. I don't use it, so I can't comment on how useful it is. But as a minimum, I suggest that you record all your technical nouns and all your technical verbs. Keep a record of all the unapproved equivalents. If you remember the base deck, base model, deck simulation, blah, blah, blah. If you've got a list of those, you can then make sure that your writers don't use them and tell them to use the approved terminology. And I like also to keep examples of correct text and incorrect text. Do the terminology management before you start to write, because overall that will save a lot of time. But terminology management is an ongoing process. You get a new product, so you'll get new terminology, and you need to maintain that. And always, always, always involve the subject matter experts. So in one project, I found the word intrinsically, and because I know the adverb intrinsically to mean inherently, fundamentally, basically, I took it out of the documentation, and the subject experts were not very pleased with this because I trashed their document, because there's a technical term, intrinsically safe, and it refers to the electrical safety of an item of equipment. So what I should have done was to first of all, I should have noticed that, and I should have asked, is this term necessary? And yes, it is necessary. And then I should have made that into an approved term. So intrinsically safe equipment or whatever. And give the reviewers plenty of time to do their work and give them plenty of guidance. So in this project I talked about, I didn't give them enough guidance, and I didn't, so they turned good English into bad English, and they changed the newly approved technical terminology back to the old unapproved terms. To conclude, unclear instructions can cause problems. STE helps to make text clear. It's not easy to implement. You'll get resistance from some writers. You need support from management, and the writers must think. Because you can write text that conforms to the STE specification and yet is complete nonsense. This is a meter rule. The words conform to the specification, but the fact is not true. So you can read more in the article that I wrote with Kieran Dodd in Current Practices in Trends in Technical Communication. It's a good read and I recommend it. And let me now, James, if you've got control, haven't you? Let me just get my, there we are, get my list of references and paste them into the chat box and send to everyone. There we go. So questions, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I'll give everyone a chance to think about any questions they want to ask and either pop them in chat or be prepared to come on to camera and voice to chat. But before we go much further, I will end the recording now. Thank you very much.